Emily Carter wasn't used to places like this. She took in the restaurant's elegant interior, the Blue Orchid, one of the most exclusive dining spots in the city. The dimly lit chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the mahogany tables, polished wine glasses, and waiters dressed in crisp white shirts moving smoothly between guests. The quiet hum of conversation mixed with the occasional clinking of silverware against porcelain plates. "Are we really eating here?" she asked, glancing at Lena Brooks, her best friend, who was busy scrolling through her phone. "Oh, come on, Emily," Lena said with a grin. "You act like we're at a Michelin star restaurant. It's just a nice place." "It's an expensive place," Emily corrected, adjusting the strap of her purse. Lena rolled her eyes. "Live a little. I just got promoted, and we are celebrating. You're not allowed to complain tonight." Emily sighed, knowing there was no arguing with Lena when she had that determined look on her face. "Fine. Where's our table?" Lena glanced at her phone again. "Table 14. Private section. Should be down that hallway." She gestured toward a dimly lit corridor lined with frosted glass doors, each leading to a private dining room. "I'll find it," Emily said, stepping ahead while Lena lingered behind, texting someone. As she walked down the corridor, she counted the table numbers on the gold-plated plaques beside each door. Table 10, Table 12, Table 14. She reached for the handle and pushed the door open, expecting to see an empty table waiting for them. Instead, she found herself face to face with a private gathering. The murmur of conversation stopped instantly. Emily froze. A dozen well-dressed men and women turned their heads toward her, their expressions ranging from confused to amused to mildly irritated. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. She had definitely just walked into the wrong room. But that wasn't what made her heartbeat stutter. At the far end of the long mahogany table, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, sat a man she hadn't seen in years. Ethan Hayes. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. He was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the seat beside him, fingers tapping idly against the wood. His dark eyes flickered toward her, cool and unreadable. Even in a room full of people, he stood out effortlessly. His features had sharpened since high school. The once slightly rebellious air he carried back then had been replaced with something even more distant, more composed. But it was still him, and the way his gaze met hers, steady, unblinking, made it clear that he recognized her too. For a split second, no one moved. Then, "Oh my God, Emily!" A voice snapped her out of her daze, and before she could react, Lena appeared beside her, grabbing her arm. Sorry, wrong room." Lena laughed awkwardly, pulling Emily back into the hallway. Leaving now." Emily barely registered being dragged out. Her mind was still stuck in that moment, in the way Ethan had looked at her, not surprised, not irritated, just watching. The door clicked shut behind them, and Lena turned to her with wide eyes. "What the hell was that?" Emily exhaled sharply, pressing a hand against her forehead. I don't know," she muttered. "I was looking for our table, and I didn't expect to see Ethan Hayes in there." Lena's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, the Ethan Hayes? High school Ethan Hayes?" Emily nodded numbly. Lena let out a low whistle. Wow, small world. Small world, indeed. Emily barely heard what Lena said next because her mind was spinning. It had been years since she last saw Ethan. Back in high school, he had been the untouchable mystery, the guy everyone was intrigued by but no one truly knew. And she had been one of the few people who got close, or at least she thought she had. But then things changed. Rumors, misunderstandings, distance. And just like that, they had become strangers again. And now, he was here, looking like he belonged in this world of expensive restaurants and tailored suits, looking like he hadn't given their past a second thought. "Come on," Lena nudged her, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Let's find our actual table before you completely dissociate." Emily let herself be led away, but even as they sat down, even as they ordered drinks, she couldn't shake the feeling in her chest. The feeling that Ethan Hayes was still the same as before. Intense, unreadable, distant. And the worst part? She still wasn't sure what he had ever meant to her. Or worse, what he still did. That night, long after the dinner ended, long after Lena had gone home and the city had settled into silence, Emily found herself lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't expected one accidental encounter to drag her mind back to the past like this. She thought she had left it all behind, but now the memories came flooding back. The whispered conversations in the back of the classroom, the stolen glances across the hallways, the moments where she thought, just maybe, he had felt something too. And then, the day everything changed. The day she heard the rumors. The day she decided to walk away first. "You really think he remembers you?" a voice in her head whispered. Emily sighed, turning over her in bed. She wasn't sure what was worse, the thought that Ethan Hayes had forgotten everything, or the thought that he hadn't. Emily Carter lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the city outside her window filling the silence of her apartment. She had been trying to sleep for hours, but her mind wouldn't let her. No matter how much she tried to push it aside, the past had resurfaced. Ethan Hayes. She hadn't thought about him in years. Not really. Not until tonight. Not until she had opened the wrong door and seen him sitting there, looking like a man who belonged in a different world than the one she had known him in. But now, the memories were unstoppable, and they dragged her back to a time when things had been simpler, yet somehow infinitely more complicated. In high school, Ethan Hayes had always been a mystery. Not in an intentional, brooding way like some guy in a romance novel, but in a way that made people notice him without understanding why. He wasn't popular in the traditional sense. He didn't play sports. He wasn't involved in clubs. He didn't actively seek attention. And yet, he was the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone turn their heads. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, calm, detached, like nothing ever truly affected him. Maybe it was the way he always seemed to know more than he let on, like he was watching the world from behind an invisible glass wall. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the way he made Emily feel. Like she was the only person who ever truly saw him. Even now, lying in bed years later, she could still remember how it had all started. It was junior year. Emily had been walking around the back of the school, taking the long way to the parking lot just to avoid the usual after-school crowd. She had turned a corner, and there he was. Ethan Hayes, leaning against the brick wall, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. At first, she had just stared, not because she was shocked that someone smoked, plenty of students did, but because it didn't fit him. Ethan wasn't the type to follow trends or do things for the sake of rebellion. If he was smoking, it wasn't because he wanted to look cool. It was because he wanted to feel something. Emily had known that much about him. So without thinking, she had marched straight up to him. "Seriously," she had said, crossing her arms. Ethan had barely looked at her. "What? You smoke now?" He had taken a slow drag, exhaled, then finally turned his head toward her, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Why do you care?" Emily had felt a flicker of frustration. "Because it's stupid," she had snapped. "You're not a smoker, Ethan. And you'd know." She had held his gaze, determined not to back down. "Yeah," she had said, "I would." For a long moment, Ethan had just stared at her, his cigarette burning between his fingers. Then, without a word, he had flicked it to the ground, crushed it under his shoe, and walked away. Emily had expected him to start smoking again the next day, but strangely enough, she never saw him with another cigarette after that. And she had always wondered, had he quit because of her? Had she mattered that much? Or had it just been a coincidence? Even now, years later, she still didn't know. The memory shifted to something less certain, more painful. Because while that moment had been the first time she felt like she had gotten through to Ethan, it wasn't the moment that defined them. No, that moment had come later. It had started as just another rumor, one of the many whispers that floated through the halls of high school. "Did you hear? Ethan Hayes likes someone." Emily had been standing at her locker when she heard it. She hadn't thought much of it at first until someone had said the name, Jessica Monroe. Emily had felt her stomach drop. She had been so sure that whatever existed between her and Ethan was real. She had told herself that even if neither of them said it out loud, it was there. But hearing that name, Jessica Monroe, it had shattered something inside her. Because Jessica was nothing like her. She was effortlessly beautiful, effortlessly confident. And Emily? Emily had just been the girl who had convinced herself she mattered. She hadn't asked Ethan if it was true. She hadn't even looked at him when she passed him in the halls. She had just stopped. Stopped waiting for him to say something. Stopped hoping for something that was never going to happen. And Ethan? He had let her. Just like that, they had faded into silence, and eventually into nothing. Emily let out a slow breath, staring up at the ceiling. Was it all just a misunderstanding? Had she walked away for no reason? Had she spent years pretending Ethan Hayes didn't matter? Only to realize that maybe, just maybe, he still did? She didn't know. She wasn't sure she wanted to know, because knowing meant facing the truth. And the truth? The truth was that Ethan Hayes had been the first boy to ever make her feel something real. And after tonight, she wasn't sure if she was ready to feel it again. Emily Carter was used to pressure. It had followed her throughout her life, unspoken, yet suffocating. From the moment she had been old enough to understand what was expected of her, she had learned that being a Carter came with rules. Rules about how to behave, rules about success, and most of all, rules about love. Which was why she wasn't remotely surprised when, the moment she stepped through the front door of her parents' house, she was immediately greeted with, "Emily, we need to talk." She barely had time to set down her purse before her mother, Margaret Carter, was leading her into the living room, her expression the perfect blend of concern and authority. Her father, David Carter, sat in his usual chair, flipping through the pages of a newspaper like this was just another evening. Emily let out a slow breath, already knowing where this was going. "Mom, if this is about Daniel—" "Of course it's about Daniel," Margaret interrupted, folding her arms. "It's been over a year since you two called off the wedding, and you still refuse to even consider giving him another chance." Emily tightened her jaw. "Because it's over." "It doesn't have to be." Emily let out a short, bitter laugh. "Yes, Mom, it does." Her mother sighed, exasperated. "Emily, you're 26. You're not getting any younger. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life alone?" Emily clenched her fists. "I'd rather be alone than with the wrong person." That was the part her mother never understood. That this wasn't about being difficult. It wasn't about refusing to settle down. It was about the fact that Daniel Reed had never been right for her. Not then. Not now. And no matter how much her mother wanted to pretend otherwise, he never would be. "Emily, sweetheart, let's be reasonable," her father finally spoke up, setting his newspaper aside. "Daniel is a good man. He's stable, successful, and he cares about you." Emily let out a sharp breath, biting back her frustration. "Dad, please. You say cares about me, like I was some charity case he took pity on." David frowned. "That's not what I meant." "Then what do you mean?" Emily challenged. Silence. Because they both knew the truth. Daniel Reed wasn't just some ex-boyfriend she had outgrown. He had been her family's perfect choice, a successful businessman, a man with a plan. Someone with a future that was neatly mapped out, with no room for uncertainty. And for a long time, Emily had tried to convince herself that he was the right choice, too. That being with him was safe, logical, expected. Until, one day, she had realized the truth. She had never really loved him. Not the way a woman should love the man she was going to marry. Not the way that made her heart skip a beat when he walked into the room. And when she had finally admitted that to herself, it had been over, even if no one else wanted to accept it. Emily, her mother tried again, her voice softer now. Daniel still calls me sometimes, you know. He still asks about you. Emily winced. Mom? He doesn't understand why you left. None of us do. You never even gave us a real answer. That was because there was no answer they would ever accept. If she told them the truth, that she had felt nothing when he proposed, that every time she pictured her future with him, she felt trapped instead of safe, that deep down she had always known that Daniel Reed was just another expectation she was supposed to fulfill, they would never understand. So she had simply said, I can't do this, and walked away. And to this day, she had never regretted it. Look, Emily said, rubbing her temples. I didn't come here to fight with you about this again, but since we're already talking about my life choices, I might as well tell you. I'm moving to Seattle. Silence. Then, excuse me? Emily stood her ground as her mother's expression twisted in shock. I got an offer at a new firm. It's a great opportunity, and I've already decided to take it. Margaret's face paled. You're running away. I'm moving forward, Emily corrected. Something you should be happy about. You're throwing everything away, her mother shot back. Your career here, your future. My future is mine to decide. It was the first time she had ever said it so clearly, so unapologetically. And it felt good, because for the first time in her life, Emily was choosing herself. That night, after leaving her parents' house, Emily sat in her car for a long time, staring at the glowing city skyline. She had known her family wouldn't take it well, but what she hadn't expected was how light she felt, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For so long, she had let other people's expectations dictate her choices. She had let herself believe that if she just followed the plan, went to the right schools, dated the right guy, got the right job, she would be happy. But happiness wasn't something you found by checking off a list. It was something you chose. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start making choices for herself. Emily exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. Seattle, a fresh start. No expectations, no Daniel, no pressure. It was everything she had been waiting for. And yet, there was still one thing she couldn't quite shake. One thought that lingered in the back of her mind, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. Ethan Hayes. The look in his eyes when they had seen each other again. The memories she thought she had buried, but were now resurfacing. And worst of all, the question she still didn't have an answer to. Had she truly moved on? Or had she just been running away all along? Emily Carter had always liked routines. They kept her life in order, kept her mind from wandering too far into places it shouldn't go. And lately, routines were the only thing stopping her from spiraling. Work, gym, dinner, sleep, repeat, simple, predictable, and, most importantly, safe. Which was why, when she decided to stop by Bennett's Cafe after work one evening, she wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. Just a quiet moment to herself, a cup of coffee, and maybe, if she was feeling particularly indulgent, a chocolate croissant. What she wasn't expecting was to see Ethan Hayes, sitting at a corner table, completely at ease, as if he belonged there. The sight of him sent a sharp jolt straight through her chest. It had been days since their unexpected encounter at the restaurant, days of trying not to think about him, days of reminding herself that it didn't matter anymore. But now he was right in front of her. And the worst part? He looked exactly the same, effortlessly composed, casual, yet put together. A black button-up, sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark eyes scanning the screen of his phone with a faint air of disinterest, like the world around him was just background noise, like he didn't know he had just turned her world upside down. Emily's fingers tightened around her purse strap. She should walk away, turn around, pretend she hadn't seen him. But as if sensing her presence, Ethan suddenly looked up, and their eyes met. For the second time in years, Emily's stomach flipped, because in that instant she knew he recognized her. And not just as some girl from his past. No, he knew exactly who she was, and that that was somehow so much worse. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Neither spoke. Just the quiet hum of the cafe around them, the distant chatter of other patrons, the soft clinking of mugs against saucers. Then Ethan's gaze dropped slightly, scanning her face with a slow, unreadable expression, like he was searching for something, like he was trying to decide if he should say something. Emily's breath caught, and then, almost imperceptibly, he smirked. Not a full smile. Not even close, just a small, fleeting curve of his lips, barely there. And yet, it sent a wave of warmth up her spine. Damn him for still having that effect on her. Emily forced herself to look away. She turned to the barista, placing her order with a calmness she did not feel. When she finally glanced back, Ethan had already returned his attention to his phone. Like she hadn't just spent the past 30 seconds having a minor crisis over a single look, like she was just another stranger passing by. Emily exhaled slowly. Fine. If that was how he wanted to play it, then so be it. She took her coffee, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the exit, ignoring the way her pulse was still unsteady. Ignoring the way her fingers still tingled from gripping her purse too tightly. Ignoring the fact that, even after all these years, he still got to her. The second Emily stepped outside, she realized her mistake. It was pouring, not a light drizzle, not even a steady rain, a full-on downpour. She cursed under her breath, glancing up at the stormy sky, of course, because the universe clearly hated her. Her car was parked 2 blocks away, and of course, she had left her umbrella at home. For a moment, she considered just running for it, but before she could move, something shifted beside her. A black umbrella appeared over her head. Emily froze, and then, slowly, cautiously, she turned and found herself face to face with Ethan Hayes. He was standing right there, holding the umbrella effortlessly, his expression unreadable as ever. Up close, he looked even more familiar, even more unchanged, like time had done nothing to him, except make him sharper, more controlled, more impossibly Ethan. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it again. She wasn't sure what she had been expecting. A smirk? A sarcastic remark? A half-hearted insult like the ones he used to throw her way in high school? Instead, he just tilted his head slightly. "You're going to stand in the rain all night?" His voice was calm, low, and just as infuriatingly smooth as she remembered. Emily swallowed. She cleared her throat. "I was going to make a run for it." "That's stupid," Ethan said simply. Emily blinked. "Excuse me?" Ethan shrugged. "You'd be drenched in less than 5 seconds." Emily narrowed her eyes. "Maybe I don't mind the rain." His lips twitched like he was amused, but he didn't argue, didn't push, just stood there holding the umbrella over her like it was the most natural thing in the world. And after a long, tense silence, he started walking, without another word. Emily hesitated, for just a second. Then, instinctively, before she could overthink it, she fell into step beside him. Because really, what else was she supposed to do? The rain continued to pour around them, the distant sound of tires splashing against wet pavement filling the night. They walked side by side, neither of them speaking, the umbrella covering just enough space for both of them. Emily could feel her own heartbeat, steady yet uncomfortably loud. Because despite the silence, despite the years, despite everything, this felt dangerously familiar. The quiet, the unspoken understanding. The way Ethan walked at exactly the same pace as her, without needing to adjust. Like they had done this before. Like this wasn't the first time he had walked her home. Like in some strange, unexplainable way, he had always been right here. And for the life of her, she didn't know what to do with that. When they reached the corner where Emily needed to turn, she finally stopped. So did Ethan. For a moment, they just stood there. Then, without looking at her, Ethan tilted the umbrella slightly, ensuring she was still covered from the rain. "I guess this is where you go," he said casually. Emily nodded. She should say something. She should thank him. She should acknowledge the fact that this meant something, even if she didn't know what. But instead, She just met his gaze, and in a voice quieter than she intended said, "Good night, Ethan." For a second, just a second, something flickered in his expression. Then, "Good night, Emily." And just like that, he turned, walking away into the rain. And Emily? She watched him go, knowing deep down that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Emily Carter was thinking about Ethan Hayes more than she should. It had been 4 days since that night in the rain. 4 days since he had silently walked beside her, holding that damn umbrella like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the first time they had seen each other in years. Like it hadn't made her chest tighten in a way she didn't want to admit. And now, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop replaying it in her head. The way he had looked at her in the cafe. The way he had walked at her exact pace without a second thought. The way he had simply said goodnight, like it was the easiest thing in the world. Like he hadn't just dragged her straight back into the past. Emily sighed, staring at her laptop screen at work, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She was supposed to be answering emails. Instead, she was lost in a spiral of thoughts she had no business entertaining. She needed to stop. This meant nothing. Ethan Hayes was just someone from her past, a fleeting moment in time. And yet, no matter how much she told herself that, the truth was simple. He was no longer just a memory. The text came later that evening. Emily had just gotten home, kicked off her heels, and collapsed onto the couch when her phone buzzed beside her. She grabbed it without thinking, and froze. A message from an unknown number. "Are you doing okay?" Her heart stopped, because she knew exactly who it was. She stared at the message, her breath caught in her throat. For a full minute, she just sat there, waiting, thinking, overthinking. She should ignore it. She should pretend she never saw it. But even as she told herself that, her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and before she could stop herself, she typed, "Who is this?" It was a stupid question. They both knew the answer, but part of her wanted to see if he'd actually say it, if he'd actually admit to breaking the silence. Seconds passed. Then Ethan, Emily exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. It was so like him. No unnecessary words. No explanation. Just Ethan. Like that was supposed to be enough. And the worst part? It kind of was. She hesitated for a long moment before finally typing back, "How did you get my number?" His reply was almost instant. "Does it matter?" Emily let out a short laugh, shaking her head. Of course he would say that. Maybe. A pause. Then Lena. Emily's eyes narrowed. She made a mental note to interrogate her best friend later. But for now she wasn't sure what to say next, so she went with the truth. "Why are you texting me?" Another pause. Then, "Just wondering if you're okay." Emily blinked. For some reason, out of all the things he could have said, that was the last thing she expected. She bit her lip, fingers tightening around the phone. This was dangerous. Talking to him was dangerous. But for some reason, she didn't want to stop. "I'm fine," she hesitated, then added, "Why would you think otherwise?" This time the reply took longer. She stared at the screen, watching the 3 little dots appear and disappear like he was typing, then stopping, then typing again. Finally, "No reason." Emily rolled her eyes. "Liar. So you texted me for no reason?" Something like that. God, he was infuriating. And yet, she found herself smiling. Just a little. Just enough to hate herself for it. The conversation didn't last much longer. After a few more short replies, Ethan stopped responding, and Emily told herself it was for the best. She needed to let this go. She needed to focus on real life. Unfortunately, real life meant dealing with her mother. "Emily, sweetheart," Margaret Carter's voice came through the phone later that night. "I spoke to Daniel today." Emily closed her eyes. Of course she did. "Mom, he asked about you," her mother continued, completely ignoring her interruption. "He said he'd love to catch up." Emily pinched the bridge of her nose. "Mom, we've talked about this." "I just don't understand why you're being so difficult about this," Margaret sighed. "You had everything with Daniel. Stability. A future." And now what? You're just going to move to Seattle and start over? That's the plan, Emily said tightly. It's not too late, Margaret pressed. You can still fix things with him. Emily's patience snapped. There is nothing to fix. Silence. Then, fine, her mother said, voice clipped. I won't bring it up again. Emily didn't believe that for a second, but for now, she was too exhausted to fight. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was a mess. Her mother's voice still rang in her ears. Daniel, Seattle, her future. And then another voice, a single text message. Are you doing okay? Ethan Hayes. Emily let out a slow breath, pressing her phone against her chest. This was a mistake, talking to him, thinking about him, letting him creep back into her life like he had every right to be there. And yet, as much as she hated to admit it, a part of her wanted him to stay. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. And that was more terrifying than anything else. Emily Carter was exhausted. It had been a long day, too many meetings, too many emails, too many things left unfinished. By the time she finally packed up and left work, the sun had already disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the city drenched in a blanket of darkness. The moment she stepped outside, she realized her night was about to get worse. It was raining. Hard. Great. Just great. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk, staring at the torrential downpour, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. She had two choices. One, wait it out. Stand under the awning like a rational person and hope it slowed down soon. Two, run for it. Pretend she was in some dramatic movie scene and dash through the rain like an idiot. Neither option was particularly appealing. She had no umbrella, no jacket, and absolutely no patience left for the day. Emily sighed, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Then, a shadow moved beside her, and suddenly the rain was no longer hitting her. She blinked, because hovering over her head was a familiar black umbrella. Her breath caught. She turned, and there he was, Ethan Hayes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city around them blurred into nothing, just the rhythmic sound of rain pounding against pavement, the distant hum of traffic, the flickering glow of streetlights reflecting off wet asphalt. Ethan stood beside her, one hand tucked into the pocket of his dark coat, the other holding the umbrella just close enough to shield them both. He looked completely unaffected, like this was just another normal night, like this wasn't the second time he had appeared beside her in the rain, uninvited yet somehow perfectly timed. Emily felt her pulse quicken. This was too much of a coincidence, wasn't it? She wet her lips, stealing a glance at him from the corner of her eye. His expression was unreadable, calm, distant, effortlessly composed, just like always. But this time, she wasn't going to let the silence win. This time, she had questions. So before she could lose her nerve, she asked, "Why do you keep showing up like this?" Ethan didn't react at first, didn't blink, didn't shift. For a second, Emily thought he was going to ignore her entirely. But then, he finally turned his head, his dark gaze flickering toward her. And in that impossibly smooth, infuriatingly quiet voice, he said, "Like what?" Emily let out a frustrated breath. "Like this," she gestured vaguely, "showing up out of nowhere, standing here like you were always meant to be here, acting like—" She hesitated, "Like you've been watching over me all along." The words got stuck in her throat. Ethan held her gaze for a long moment. Then, without saying a single word, he simply turned back toward the street and started walking. Emily gaped. "Seriously?" She called after him. No response. He just kept walking, like he expected her to follow, like she would follow. And the worst part, she did. Because of course she did. They walked side by side, just like last time. No conversation, no explanation, just the two of them, moving in perfect sync, like they had done this 1,000 times before. The rain poured around them, drowning out the noise of the city, creating an illusion of isolation. Emily tried not to overthink it, tried not to read into the way he matched her pace without effort. tried not to acknowledge the way her heart was pounding far too fast for a simple walk in the rain. She hated this, hated how easily Ethan could make her feel off balance, hated how, despite everything, there was still something about him that felt safe, like he had always been there, like he had never really left. And maybe that was the problem. When they reached the next street, Ethan finally stopped. Emily did too, her breath coming a little quicker than she wanted to admit. The silence stretched between them, heavy, charged. She turned toward him, expecting an answer. A reason, something. But all Ethan did was tilt the umbrella slightly, ensuring she was still covered, before looking at her with that same unreadable expression. Emily's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "You're not going to tell me, are you?" she muttered. Ethan's lips curved ever so slightly. "What do you think?" Emily exhaled sharply, shaking her head. She should be annoyed, frustrated, but instead, all she felt was curious. Because for all of Ethan's silence, he was here, for the second time, without a reason, without an invitation. And maybe, just maybe, that was the answer itself. "Good night, Emily." His voice was softer this time, almost like he wasn't sure if he should be saying it. Emily hesitated. She should walk away first. She should be the one to leave. But for some reason, she stayed still. And instead of walking off, she simply said, "Good night, Ethan." He held her gaze for a second longer. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. And Emily? She stood there watching him disappear into the rain, and for the first time since they had seen each other again, she let herself wonder. Had she really been the one leaving all these years? Or had he always been one step behind her, waiting for her to turn around? And if that was the case, what did it mean now? Emily Carter should have seen it coming. Her mother had always had a way of finding out things she wasn't supposed to know. And Emily's rekindled connection with Ethan Hayes? That was exactly the kind of thing Margaret Carter would consider a disaster. So really, Emily should have expected it. She should have been prepared. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she walked through the door of her parents' house that evening, only to find her mother waiting for her, arms crossed, expression cold and unreadable, and sitting across from her father in the living room. Daniel Reed. Emily's stomach dropped. "Emily," her mother said smoothly, like this wasn't a trap. "We need to talk." Emily's grip tightened around her bag. "Why is Daniel here?" Margaret sighed, as if she were the one who had to be patient. "Because I invited him." Emily's blood boiled. "Mom, sit down." It wasn't a request. Emily let out a slow breath, barely restraining the urge to walk right back out. But she had spent her entire life avoiding confrontation, and she was done running. So with a slow and deliberate movement, she sat. "I ran into Daniel earlier this week," her mother started, her tone far too casual, "and we had a little chat." Emily did not react. She knew exactly where this was going. "Imagine my surprise," Margaret continued, "when I heard that my daughter has been associating with Ethan Hayes again." Emily's chest tightened. Daniel, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Emily," he said, his voice calm, practiced, "your mother and I are just concerned. Ethan isn't." "Don't," Emily cut in. "Don't tell me what Ethan is or isn't." Daniel frowned. "I just mean, I don't care what you mean." Emily's voice was sharper than she had intended, but she didn't care. Her mother let out an exasperated sigh. "Sweetheart, we're just trying to help you." "No, Mom," Emily snapped. "You're trying to control me, again." Margaret's eyes flashed with irritation. "You think we're the ones controlling you? You think Ethan Hayes is some kind of better option?" Emily stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "He's not an option," she said, her voice steady. "He's a choice, and I get to make it." Her mother's expression darkened. "Ethan isn't the kind of man you should be with." "Because he's not Daniel?" Emily challenged. Margaret didn't deny it. Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Emily, you know I still care about you," he said, voice soft. "I just want you to be happy." Emily turned to him, and for the first time in a long time she felt nothing. Not anger, not resentment, not even the remnants of guilt, just relief. "Then you should be happy for me, Daniel," she said quietly, "because I already am." And with that, she turned and walked away. Emily's hands were shaking by the time she got outside. She took a deep breath, trying to push down the storm of emotions that had built up inside her. But there was only one thing she could think about, Ethan. She needed to see him, not because she needed reassurance, not because she needed saving, but because, for the first time in years, she was choosing him. She found him at the place she knew he would be, Bennett's Cafe. She walked inside, scanning the room, heart pounding, and there he was, sitting alone at a corner table, a cup of coffee in front of him, looking completely unbothered by the world around him. But the second he saw her, something in his expression shifted, like he knew, like he had been waiting for her to figure it out. Emily walked straight to him. She didn't hesitate, didn't second guess, and when she finally stopped in front of him, she said the words she should have said years ago. "I don't want to lose you again." The words hung between them. Ethan's fingers tightened around his cup, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You sure about that?" Emily let out a shaky breath. "Yes, no hesitation, no doubt, just truth." And for the first time since they had met again, Ethan smiled, a small, rare, genuine smile. "Good," he murmured, because for him, there had only ever been one answer. Emily Carter wasn't expecting a call from Ethan Hayes, especially not after what happened the night before. She had been the one to find him. She had been the one to finally admit that she didn't want to lose him. And in return, he had just smiled. No dramatic declarations, no immediate answers, just that quiet, knowing look that had always been so uniquely him. And now, as she stared at his name flashing across her phone screen, she felt her pulse quicken. She hesitated for only a second before answering. "Hey, meet me at the park," Ethan said, his voice smooth, calm. Emily frowned slightly. "Now? Now?" She exhaled, glancing at the clock. It was already late, the city outside her window glowing under streetlights and neon signs. But something in his voice, steady but laced with something unreadable, made her say, "Okay." And just like that, she was out the door. The park wasn't crowded. At this hour, most people were either home or in bars, leaving the space almost silent except for the rustling of trees and the distant hum of traffic. Ethan was already there when she arrived, sitting on a bench near the edge of the lake, one arm stretched along the backrest, gazing out at the city skyline. For a moment, Emily just watched him, the soft glow of streetlights caught in his dark hair, casting long shadows across his sharp features. He looked different. Not just older, not just more put together than the boy she had once known, but like someone carrying something heavy, something that had been left unsaid for too long. Emily took a slow breath and walked toward him. He glanced up at her arrival, his expression impossible to read. But when she hesitated, he did something unexpected. He gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit." And for once, she did. They sat together without speaking for a long time. The city stretched out in front of them, skyscrapers lit like scattered stars, their reflections shimmering across the lake's surface. Emily could feel the tension in the air, not uncomfortable, but charged, like something was about to shift, like something had to be said. And then, Ethan exhaled softly and broke the silence. "I waited for you back then." Emily's breath caught. She turned to him sharply, but he was still looking ahead, his expression unreadable. "What?" she whispered. Ethan finally looked at her, his dark eyes steady. "Back in high school," he said. "I waited for you." Emily's chest tightened. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if she even could say anything. But Ethan wasn't done. "I tried to tell you so many times," he continued, his voice lower now, "that I liked you, that you weren't just another person in my life." Emily swallowed, her throat dry. But every time I was about to say it, something got in the way, Ethan murmured. A rumor, a misunderstanding. Or are you looking at me like you were already halfway out the door? Emily flinched, because she remembered. She remembered hearing that Ethan had feelings for someone else. She remembered pulling away first, deciding that if she didn't matter to him, then she wouldn't let herself care either. And she had been so sure that was the truth. But now he was telling her that she had been wrong, that all those years ago he had been waiting for her, and she had never turned around. Emily's chest ached. Ethan, she started, but he shook his head. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad, he said simply. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned toward her completely. I'm telling you this because I won't make the same mistake again. Her breath hitched, Ethan met her gaze, and this time there was no hesitation, no ambiguity, just quiet certainty. I like you, Emily. Emily's world stopped. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She had imagined this moment before, back in high school, on nights when she had let herself wonder what could have been. But never like this. Never with him looking at her like that. Never with the knowledge that this time he wasn't going to let her walk away. She swallowed hard. Ethan, she whispered again, but she had no idea what she was about to say. Because what did you say when the past came crashing back into the present? What did you say when the thing you had once wanted most was suddenly, finally, real? Ethan searched her face, waiting, not pushing, not demanding, just waiting, just like he had before. And this time, she wasn't going to make him wait anymore. Emily Carter had spent so much of her life running from expectations, running from her past, running from her own feelings, but now, as she stood in front of Ethan Hayes with his confession still hanging in the air between them, she realized she didn't want to run anymore. Not from him. Not from this. So instead of hesitating, instead of questioning, she looked Ethan in the eye, took a slow breath, and said the only thing that mattered. I like you too. For a second, just a second, something shifted in Ethan's expression. Something unreadable, something vulnerable. Then his lips curved into the faintest smirk. Took you long enough. And just like that, everything changed. By the next morning, everyone knew. It started with a few whispers in the office, then a couple of knowing looks from her coworkers. By lunchtime, her phone was blowing up. Emily, is it true? Are you and Ethan a thing? Lena, holy shit, you're dating Ethan Hayes? Random coworker she barely talked to. So you dumped me for him after all. Daniel, Emily rolled her eyes at that last one. Of course, Daniel was bitter. Of course, he had to make it about himself. And of course, her mother was next. Emily Carter, what were you thinking? Her mother's voice rang through the phone, sharp with disbelief. Emily pressed her fingers to her temple, already exhausted. Mom, I don't have time for this. You don't have time for common sense? Margaret snapped. Ethan Hayes is not the kind of man you should be with. Emily exhaled slowly. And why is that, Mom? Because he's... Her mother hesitated, searching for the right words. He's not stable. He's not Daniel. Emily laughed. Actually laughed. That's the point. Silence. Then, you're making a mistake, Margaret said coldly. Emily smiled. Then it's mine to make. And for the first time in her entire life, she hung up first. If the rumors bothered Ethan at all, he sure as hell didn't show it. When Emily saw him later that evening, he was just as calm as always. So, she said, crossing her arms, you know everyone's talking about us, right? Ethan raised an eyebrow. And? Emily sighed. And people are asking questions. Let them. Of course, because of course he didn't care. My mom is losing her mind. Figured. Daniel is pissed. Figured that too. Emily let out a frustrated groan. You're impossible. Ethan's lips twitched. And yet, here you are. Damn him. Damn him for being right. The real test came the next day at lunch. Emily and Ethan were sitting in their usual spot at the cafe when someone, a guy from work, Nick something, decided to be bold. So, Nick said, leaning on the table with an obnoxious grin, "Are you and Emily really dating?" The entire cafe seemed to go quiet. Emily tensed. This was it. This was the moment where things could still go back to how they were, where Ethan could laugh it off, where he could dodge the question like he always did. But instead, he did something that made Emily's heart stop. He reached over, took her hand, and interlocked their fingers, right in front of everyone. The cafe erupted. "No freaking way. Okay, but why is this kinda hot?" "Emily, girl, you win." Emily barely heard any of it, because all she could focus on was Ethan. The way he was completely unfazed by the attention. The way his fingers curled around her so effortlessly. The way he turned to Nick, met his gaze, and, without a second of hesitation, said, "Yeah, we are." Emily couldn't breathe. Not because she was embarrassed, not because people were watching, but because this was real. Ethan wasn't hiding. He wasn't brushing it off. He was claiming her. And for someone like Ethan, who had always stayed on the sidelines, always avoided attachment, always kept people at a distance, that meant everything. Her fingers tightened around his. And when he looked at her, really looked at her, she knew. She wasn't running anymore, and neither was he. Emily Carter had always believed that happiness was a destination, something she had to chase, something she had to earn. But now, as she sat at her favorite cafe, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard, she realized she had been wrong. Happiness wasn't something distant. It wasn't some faraway goal. It was here, in the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the window, in the quiet hum of life moving around her, and most of all, in the presence of the man sitting across from her, flipping absent-mindedly through a book, but watching her more than he was reading. Ethan Hayes. Her Ethan. The thought still made her heart flip in the best way possible. For the first time in a long time, everything felt lighter. Even the stories she wrote. Emily had always been a writer. Not professionally, not yet. But she had always loved stories, loved the way words could make someone feel something real. For years, she had written about love, but never the happy kind. Her stories had always been filled with longing, with heartbreak, with the almosts and the not quites. Because that was what she had known. That was what she had believed in. But now as she stared at the blinking cursor on her screen, she realized something. For the first time, she wanted to write something different. Something where the two people who were meant to be together actually found their way back to each other. Something where love wasn't just a lesson in pain, but a reason to stay, a reason to believe, a reason to choose. She smiled to herself and started typing. She had barely gotten a few paragraphs down when a shadow fell over her screen. Emily blinked, looking up, only to find Ethan leaning over her shoulder. "So what happens next?" His voice was low, amused, far too close to her ear. Emily rolled her eyes, refusing to let him get to her. "You'll just have to wait for the update, like everyone else," Ethan smirked. That stupid smirk that always made her want to kiss it off his face or punch it, sometimes both. "That's not how this works, Carter." Before she could respond, he leaned in, and then, soft, warm, gentle, a kiss. Not on her lips, but on her forehead, and somehow that was worse, because forehead kisses meant something. They weren't about heat or passion or impulse. They were about care, about something deeper, something real. Emily's heart stuttered, and Ethan just watched her reaction, the corner of his mouth twitching. "How about we write the next chapter together?" he murmured. Emily stared at him. Then she laughed. A real, full laugh, her heart lighter than it had ever been, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't just writing a love story. She was living it. And that was the best ending she could have ever asked for. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss any future content.